Ladies and gentlemen, Track Bro here. I wanted to make a quick video that underlines some of the themes of this channel. And I look at my videos and I think, you know, I'm not a famous guy. I could talk about whatever the hell I want. But at the same time, I'm a very thematic guy. Track Bro, I'm a guy that I go on the track every couple days after work, after church, and I try to give my best lap time in my Mustang. That's what I do. I built my Mustang to be as fast as possible, following my own guide, and yeah, I've been kind of following in my footsteps pretty well. And once I'm done at the track, I go to the gym. Sometimes I go to the gym, then I go to the track. But that's pretty much what my life has been for the past couple of years. And I'm happy about that. And what I like to harp about on this channel is supercars and performance cars. And the reason is that I grew up in an era where there was a plethora of supercars and performance cars, but not many were really that interesting. So now we live in an era where there is a lot of supercars, but not a lot that are kind of taking us by surprise. A lot of them are pretty obvious. They do obvious things that we think they should be doing, and it leaves us with little surprise. Well, Ford tried to give us a nice surprise in the form of the Ford Mustang GTD. This one, actually. And it's a pretty cool car, I must admit. I like it personally. I think that, if they sell 10,000 of them, it won't be enough. I think it might be like the Ford GT fiasco, where we get a lot of talk and all this, but not a lot of people buy them. And then the hype kind of slowly builds up, and then they start to go way up in value and in price. The Ford Mustang GT was in kind of an interesting era where you had a lot of YouTube influencers that started buying supercars. And I remember one specific YouTuber that I used to watch a lot, not an influencer or anything like that, but of earlier video game fame, bought a Ford GT, and I thought it was such an impressive car, even with its EcoBoost V6. And now I appreciate this car, as now it has an actual V8. It's a supercar. I believe it's faster than the Ford GT in a lot of ways. But obviously, that's not what it's meant to compete with. It's meant to compete with the GT2s and other kind of track cars. And with no fault of its own, because it needed so much aero and so many bits to be perfect to compete against that kind of, speed, it has to be very heavy. It has to be very comfortable inside the car, such that it can compete. And it made the cardinal mistake of starting with a Mustang chassis, because we all know that the Mustang is a very good muscle car chassis. In fact, it's probably one of the better ones, even though it sacrificed a lot of its stability for weight. But adding even more stability will only increase the weight, and that's the cardinal mistake that the Mustang crew did, in my opinion. And what happens is, instead of competing against like a Ford GT, I seen a guy online talk about a Bugatti Bolide. That doesn't make any sense. They don't even have the same horsepower. And the real competitor, and I believe it's a competitor in all categories, including collection, is going to be the C7 Corvette ZR1, of also Nürburgring fame, and a couple of other things, but I would say infamy for the case of the Corvette. That's why it's in orange here, while the Mustang is in blue. If we take a look at the scoreboard here, now I'm not going to look at it too much, but let's just say that quite a long time ago, the Viper and the Corvette had a direct rivalry. They fought very, very hard to win each other's throats. And what basically happened is, during the 2010s, during the height of the Top Gear era, you had these supercars that started to appear. These were big aero supercars, but one such car didn't have very much aero, and that was the C606. If we look at the C606, what made this generation of Corvette so great was not that it had big aero. It was that it went back to the old recipe for supercar greatness. It was lightweight. It had an aluminum chassis instead of the regular steel chassis. It had carbon reinforced panels, and it just had a big honkin' motor. And doing this recipe perfectly, it was able to attain great fame, and it was able to destroy Nürburgring times. And what it took Corvette to do, the Dodge Viper had to do it better. And so the original ACR, which was kind of an homage to its trim level, this became an actual car, let's say, separate car from the regular one, kind of like a Supra versus a GR Supra, or a better yet, a Corolla and a GR Corolla. The Dodge Viper ACR was kind of a hybrid between the race GTSR and the actual GTS. And this thing was incredibly fast. It had about the same recipe, although this was a car that was now, quite old. I mean, this specific chassis was about a decade old, and the chassis before it was about 3 decades old in terms of technology. But it competed because it had better aero, better cooling, bigger motor, and a better drive. And that's really what allowed it to be a little faster than this Z06. Now, we all know the story. The ZR1 comes out, destroys the ACR, proves that the Viper chassis is just older, it's not going to compete, and throws it in the dust. As a retaliation, the Viper team decides to put one last hurrah in the chassis, creates a larger percentage aluminum chassis, and competes once again. We have to go all the way down to find the new Viper ACR. Sorry, this is the 2010 one, which also kind of destroyed some things. But it was truly with the newest Viper, the 2017, that we got a 7-minute lap, which was incredible. Absolutely insane. The car didn't have necessarily more power, not necessarily more torque. All it had was the extreme aero package on a more suited aluminum chassis. It weighed about 3,400 pounds, which is about 70 pounds lighter than the previous version, and that's how it got to destroy that lap. We go into the modern era, and the C7 Corvette, sorry, this is the brand new one. The C7 Corvette is nowhere to be found. Now, why did that happen? Well, basically, there was a lot of drama with the C7 Corvette. It got a sub 7-minute lap, and they were not able to record it. They got it a second lap, and that second lap, I believe, is somewhere in here, where they were way lower than the Viper ACR. So the Viper ACR was basically canonized, whereas the C7 ZR1 was never truly canonized, and so the value on those Corvettes really dropped. And so if we look today, bring a trailer. I mean, I would buy this, 90,000 bid for a brand new, basically a brand new ZR1. Even with the automatic transmission. I mean, these are very, very fast. The 8 speeds are fast. And the whole point of these guys is that you could get them for really cheap. 190 grand, 150 grand. Here, look, 134 grand. That's a Z06. Did they go back up in value? 134 grand. 132 grand. C7R, 100 grand. 127 grand. They're slowly plateauing in value. And so, in my opinion, this is going to be a buy in a couple years. Whereas with the Mustang GTD, they just came out. They start at 350 grand. And their numbers are very clear. The Ford Mustang GTD set a record-breaking 652 lap. This, surprisingly, broke the SR8 LM lap. This was basically the benchmark when I was a little kid, as this was one of the fastest cars on the road, and it did that by basically having nothing in the car, being the lightest, tiniest little car with the biggest wing on the back that you could have at the time. It got a 648 in certain conditions, and I believe this is the one that had the V8 Yamaha that revved out all the way to 10,000 RPM. Although I might be wrong, it could be just the R1, the Yamaha R1 motor. Other such cars that beat it were the 991 GT2 RS. This is the old one. I saw one of these with a beautiful blonde in it on the highway, and I just thought, man, I don't know if I could go into that car, you know. I'd be too impressed. The 992 beat that record somehow, probably with a big ass arrow that it has. The Aventador SVJ beat that record. Now that one is a big slap in the face to a lot of people, because this thing is really not that impressive compared to the regular Aventador. I remember this thing being way overhyped. And we just keep going and we find the Black Series, which this thing was pretty impressive, although it's a spiritual successor to the Viper, so that's, I guess it's no wonder, right? The Viper had very, very good genes. So, what's my point with all of this crap? My point is that GTD basically fails. It doesn't accomplish what was meant to be happening. It was meant to compete against the GT2 RS, even with the Manthey Performance Kit, which made about 900 horsepower, was a big wing car. It wasn't the biggest wing. Now we get the biggest wing with the GT3 RS, the brand new one, the 992. It doesn't go up there. It's not as good. It's also not as good as the GT Black Series. And obviously, it's not going to beat the ZR1X, which makes, like 1,200 horsepower, all-wheel drive, hybrid system. Like, that's just a recipe for this thing to beat it. Although I believe it's a 4,000-pound car. So, I mean, at least in the weight category, it kind of competes. Even the GT3 RS that has about 500 horsepower, like literally just 500 horsepower, beats the GTD, which makes almost double the horsepower. So it makes you wonder where this car is going to kind of land in terms of the actual value of it. I believe it's going to be a depreciating collector's car. I believe there's going to be a very long time where people are going to keep the car in their collector's garage. And at some point in the future, they will try to liquidate it, as it's not really a memorable car per se. And it's going to end up like one of these CLK Black Series. It's not as powerful as the SL being like the Ford GT, but it is just as cool. So people are going to think that they should keep them, and eventually it'll go out of coolness. It'll just go out of style. And so, to reinforce this argument, I'm going to argue that the C7 ZR1 should have had a lap closer to this guy, the brand new one, the C8. In fact, I thought this was a C8, the C7. And the reason is like this. It has almost the same amount of downforce as the GTD on top speed. If we look at the Mustang GTD, we see that the downforce is 2,000 pounds at 150 miles per hour. It beats out the GT3 RS in terms of pound-feet. And at 180 miles per hour, it does 2,000 pounds. However, this is the new way of recording downforce, and it's a more accurate way to the to an engineer, but it doesn't make any sense to a guy who goes on the track normally. This was the old way to do it, which was at top speed 1,000 pounds. If we look at the top speed of ZR1 with the ZTK, we see that the top speed is only 200 miles an hour. That means that in the same range as the GTD, it has about half the downforce. Okay, so half the downforce, but keep in mind, it has better weight distribution, it's a lighter car, and here's the kicker. The acceleration metrics are very, very similar. In the 0 to 60 department, the Corvette ZR1 shaves it by 0.2 seconds. Here in the 0 to 100 by 0.3. The 0.3 lead keeps up all the way to 170 miles per hour. That means that it gets to 170 faster, and then it remains at about half the downforce as the GTD. So what does that mean? That means that going into a corner, the GTD has an advantage. The advantage being it has more downforce, so it can brake on downforce. And also we know this because if we look at the 70 miles per hour to 0, they're about the same. So it's all about the downforce. The downforce will benefit it. But coming out of the corner, the ZR1, in my opinion, under most variables, except for maybe at high speed corners, it'll keep up and potentially out accelerate the GTD. And keep in mind, this is fully stock. These are fully stock cars, and the price metric is what really kills the GTD's value. The power per ton is pretty bad, and I think it's something that the engineers should have considered more. But it's really the price per value, the price per second, or whatever you want to call it. It's always going to go in the favor of the C701, and that's why, in my opinion, it's one of these unsung heroes that should have been. So what do I think is going to happen with the GTD? I think that GTD's value is going to go way down. I think that right now we're looking at it, the way that we're looking at it, it seems like it's up. So it seems like it's going up, or it seems at least that they've been able to sustain all of the actual supply. So the supply starts there. But what's going to happen to the actual kind of like supposed value, the perceived value? Well, it's going to go down, as all cars do. I mean, look, if we look at here, Porsche Panamera Turbo 730. It used to be the fastest four-door car. In fact, it was the fastest for quite a while. I remember it even beat the Tesla at the time, the Tesla Plaid. Does anybody remember that? Nope. SLS AMG. Does anybody remember that the SLS AMG put a 730 lap, which was pretty impressive at the time? No. People remember it because of its gull wings, and that's about it. People remember this thing as it was super ugly. That's why this thing lost its value. Nobody wants it. You know, why not buy the GT63? It's a fatter car, but it's a more beautiful car. Same thing with the GTR, same thing with the Carrera GT. Nobody's going to remember these things. So yeah, today it looks like it's pretty good, but I believe the perceived value is going to go down. And so as soon as the perceived value goes down too much, here you have a time where people will hold the car, they will not sell it. And I believe that the value is going to go down very, 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 very fast. Okay? That's what I think is going to happen. The perceived value is going to keep going down. And at some point, it's going to remain at some level. At that point, people that are holding are going to try to sell up. And they'll probably be able to, because at auction, a lot of young collectors just will buy these little cars even slightly over the perceived value, thinking that the value is going to keep going up. So yeah, this is what I think is gonna happen, and that's during the span of 20 years. Okay. With the Corvette, what's really interesting and a huge tell is this is the supply, and when people first bought it, they actually bought about half of them, and the other half sold way later. It took a really long time to get rid of all the ZR1s. In fact, the C8 was still on sale, and they were still trying to get rid of them. During COVID, you still had some ZR1s on sale, and people basically bought them up. So in 2020, they finally sold them all. Basically, it's made it a three-year sale thing, even though they really wanted to sell it all at some point. Ever since then, the value had been going down, and I think that we're at a tipping point here. And the reason is the perceivedness of this car was pretty high. When we got the actual lap times of it, it basically didn't get any lap times, so it went down. And at some point here, people started forgetting about it fully. And what I think is going to happen is people are going to start remembering it again, and it's going to go up. And the reason is, firstly, it's the last manual, or one of the last manual Corvettes. Big aero. People love big aero. My whole generation loves big aero. Big supercharger. People love big superchargers. And it's also one of the last a shock-only suspension. So these new models that have the new Magna Ride suspension are very good, but they're not just a shock-only adapter. They're a full-blown new suspension. So they have multiple shocks, and they're very, very expensive to hold. Whereas I believe the ZR1 is going to be very cheap because it's a shock-only suspension. They didn't change anything other than the shock. Now, there's an argument. The argument is that it could be just worth buying a Z06 with a ZTK package. And I've seen this online, where people will buy the big wing and they'll keep the rest. I think this is even a Grand Sport because it has the Grand Sport lines. But like this, for instance, is a ZR1. But some people will buy the Z06 and they'll put a ZR1 body kit. In fact, I would probably do that. I'm a pretty smart guy, so I would probably do that. And my argument is that this is why the values have been going down. But at some point, people are going to track these and realize how much better they are, which is gonna make the perceived value go up. That's what I think is gonna happen. And again, this is a span of 20 years, so I would say start buying now, at some point when they're under about 200 grand, and keep them in your garages. Don't use them necessarily. Keep them in your garages. Buy the Z06 if you want something cheap to play with, and hold them, because they will eventually, especially the manual ones, they will eventually go way up in value. That's my 2 cents.